you kind of just dial in on one aspect of that. I guess you could say like that, the more information you have access to, the more informed you are to direct, maneuver, vary your, hate to use the term, strategy. And so if you kind of look at two different examples of that, so the consumer chain where there's all those self-interested parties in the middle protecting their own information, their own cut of the pie, as opposed to on the other end, a digitally native vertical brand where I guess the whole purpose of that model is to maintain control. It's probably a lot more work. You're not outsourcing, but you're maintaining control of the information. You've got the consumer there and you're building and directing the channels to the consumer. That's that's the ideal, but it's very, very difficult to do. So once again, one of these really difficult questions, what's that fine line between maintaining control and access to data, and not giving away or overinvesting so much in a supply chain that's going to strip that away from you?
That's a that is a very interesting question. I mean, I've seen sort of two quite interesting perspectives on it. I think the world has changed a bit because also the nature of the kind of data that we want to get hold of and our ability to get data and the regulations around data, are quite fluid and dynamic, and they've changed quite a bit over time. But I can give you two really interesting examples. I mean, I worked in distributors essentially, so particularly in the UK, working through Fields, Morrison, Verdon, and Bibendum and Matthew Clark. One of the really interesting parts all the time was this sort of golden rule that you never ever let any of your suppliers know who it was that you sold to, because ultimately they would always sort of say, well, can you send us our customer list and then we can all send them a Christmas card. It was always be sort of nice, oh, can we do this? Because you knew as soon as you sent them that, the one piece of value you had, which was these are people who like to buy your products, they could then take that to somebody else and they would simply go, oh, another agent has gone and offered us slightly better terms, but we've got our customer list, so we can just go back to all those customers. In fairness, actually, it doesn't really work that way, because it turns out lots of people buy from a distributor because they quite like the distributor more than often they like the wine brands that sit within them. But you can sort of get that idea. But there was a real challenge, and increasingly what we used to see, and I don't know whether to what extent I'm sort of breaking it, but you used to particularly find Bordeaux chateaus who have a very complex distribution system, which works for them or has worked for them very well through courtiers, négociants, then going into, importers, then through to distributors. And they are one of those sort of chains where it can be sort of 6 stages of removal, from the end customer. Once Bordeaux wasn't that easy to sell anymore, it wasn't sort of instantly getting snapped up. It turned out they had no idea who it was who bought their wines. And they didn't really know why they bought their wines either, actually. They sort of knew nothing about their customers. And there has been a little bit of a tradition. I don't know, they've always got